Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war.
Welcome to Comic Books and You. Today we're going to be looking at Machinegun Reloaded. I think it's Machinegun 1, but with a re-edit or something. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't managed to track down everything. This is the first book I've got off Global Comics in that series from Atrocity Press. I've streamed a few times with the creator of this. Fairly nice guy. He seems to have very good ideas overall as well. As we've talked to him and I've looked at some of his other campaigns and other products. We're going to go in details over this one like we normally do. But I have to tell you here, it's the complete opposite of what we had on Tuesday this week. We really did a kid-friendly book on Tuesday. This one here is for mature audience and not mature audience like you have in most DC stuff. No, here it's really 90s comic mature. Other extreme from what we had earlier. Also another extreme compared to what we had earlier. I think I did the video with the most characters being reviewed. Well, in this one, we're going to go over a single character. Sister Mary is pretty much the only important character in this story. There's other, significant characters, but no other character is really driving the story forward or significantly enough that they warrant a page of their own. She is an immortal Templar warrior. She hunts monsters to keep humanity safe from the shadows. A very nice setup. She doesn't seem to be extremely biased, at least at this point in the story. Maybe she was earlier. We don't have the full, background of the character in this particular book. It's not a origin story, but she can still do her work as a sister. She's still able to do prayers. She's still able to do what needs to be done, basically. She's also a pretty good supernatural detective. She does seem to know much about the different creatures that live out there and how to take them out. And she also appears to be rather competent at eliminating werewolves. It says that it's the first thing she did in her career, so we have a good background there. We begin our story as our heroine is infiltrating a vampire's neo-Gothic hideout. She has a few kind words towards him due to that, as she finds it a little bit cliche, obviously. And luckily for her, that bloodsucker is also very cliche in terms of potential. He's rather hubris-filled and tries to sneak up on her and gets run through almost immediately. And then afterwards, she has to clean up a little bit and fight all the lesser acolytes. There's quite a variety of little monsters here. When this is done, Mary heads back to her convent and gets cleaned up in a rather graphic scene. It's still fairly decent. There's nothing you wouldn't see on, let's say, HBO. Old HBO. I don't know how to really qualify it here. But it's definitely not something that would be for kids. We then learned that Mary was sent to a small rural town in America where people are talking about monsters being about and them being rather fearful for their flocks, for their animals, for everything they have. As this is going on, Mary is summoned by Cardinal O'Grady, who thinks he's going to be the next pope as well. He seems to be a rather crude and crass individual, and he orders her to try to solve the problems in that town, mainly revolving around issues regarding werewolves. As she leaves, she chastises a drunk and the cemetery, getting him to renounce his ways, at least for a short time, showing that while she might not be the most pious individual, she still has somewhat of a kind heart. Back in town, Mary goes and interrogates some of the locals who do talk about werewolves. They also talk about Sasquatch and chupacabras and the other things that you might have here in North America in terms of monsters. No talk of Wendigo. That probably wasn't that popular in that region. I don't know. The locals also talk about you could use a silver bullet, but that it would explode as it comes out of the rifle. All sorts of monster hunting discussion by people who are not professionals, while Mary giving us a little bit of an inner monologue about how efficient silver actually is once it has the proper blessings, etc. Mary's directed to a guy called Jim, who has seems to be a junkyard, and he's laying traps around his coop and around his junkyard in order to catch whatever is attacking his coop every night. And it gives her a bit of an idea of what is around the place and what is going on in town. As evening falls, Mary does use herself as a bait to draw a werewolf to attack her. She manages to kill it after being slashed across the back, which would cause her to probably turn into a werewolf if she didn't drink a nice cup of Wolfsbane tea. It would probably be a bit toxic if you were anybody not with her level of talent. And it's she drinks it out of a very nice Atrocity Press cup. I don't know if those cups are available on Atrocity Press's website or eBay store, but I don't know. It might be a cool idea. In the same evening, well, unfortunately for our friend Jim, the werewolf pack decide to actually raid his place. Quite a few werewolves show up. He does manage to put a couple rounds into one of them from his shotgun, but it doesn't stop the werewolves from, ripping the top of his RV open and ripping his head off. The next morning, Mary is woken up by another sister telling her about Jim's death, and they have to go to his place in order to comfort the locals. Of course, Mary is going to use that as an opportunity to investigate and try to figure out what's actually going on. And she's able to gather some clues really around Jim's place, and she realizes that she's actually dealing with an entire pack of werewolves and not just one or few individuals. We also learned that werewolves tend to rip people's eyes out. That's a nasty thing to do, but I mean, supernatural creatures are known to have a few idiosyncrasies. We end the issue with a flashback as to when Mary was trying to join the Templar Order and what seems to be a werewolf hunt, because she says that that's how she cut her teeth into the society, basically. It's a nice story overall, fairly nicely packed as well. We've got just enough content to keep us entertained through the whole thing. It has a few issues that I will bring up as we read through this. And there's a few things here that I feel are just a little bit too nihilistic to my liking. The art is really good throughout it, so that really helps the book, in my opinion. And the story has just enough twists and turns to keep you on your toes through the whole thing. You do wonder what's really going on and how Mary's going to deal with the situation. There are multiple covers available for this book. You probably would be able to find them floating around, but this is the one that's on Global Comics, at least in the Atrocity Press section. I think there's a version of that book also on Global Comics that's related to Antarctic Press that has a different cover, but that's the one I own. Very 90s style, very reminiscent of things like Witchblade and a few other of those sexy bad girl comics that were omnipresent back in those days. Beautiful women is always a great way to attract attention. It works generally well. There's some people who manage to fail at it, but in this case, it doesn't. We don't see the heroine in this particular costume in the book, and it doesn't have, the machine gun that is referred to in the title. So there's a few things that I probably would have gone differently with. But I mean, like I said, this is one of the many covers for this book. Some of them might be even more relevant. The branding on this, though, is really, really good, and it's worth looking at just because of how it's set up and how it's colored. It's got everything that it really needs to attract the eye and keep people interested. This is a superior branding compared to almost anything that we've seen recently. Once again, that's another book that I got off Global Comics, but it is really the first time that I actually dislike what I got from there. The quality on these is actually pretty low. They're very lightweight PDFs. As soon as you start zooming in a little bit, you start getting digital artifacts, and it starts looking pretty poor. And that's not anything to do with the artist or the author. It's really a problem with the file that was uploaded there. Maybe there's a better version floating around, but that particular version is great. The one that you actually get in the web app, if you're reading through the book on Global Comics directly rather than downloading it, is actually, I was going to say much better. It's better. And if you tolerate reading things on a web app, which most people are very fine with nowadays, it is perfectly fine. There are floppy versions of this floating around. There's a trade paperback from what I've heard as well. Might need to hunt them down at some point to get the full collection. I'll see what's available and when it's available. The character art in this one is really gorgeous, and not just because the women are great looking. Stuff in general looks really good. All the monsters here have their own look. We get a variety of regular people, and we've got a variety of other things floating around, like Cardinal O'Grady, who looks positively ugly. So everything in there looks how it should, and with very little issues in terms of anything that would quickly distract you from reading. Sister Mary is really great looking, and we get to pretty much see all of her in this book, but it's not as exaggerated as you would see in many other books in that kind of category. I would like her to be a little bit more muscular in terms of her body shape, but that's probably just something you ignore because of how you want to actually depict the character. It's just a standard thing. When you have a woman warrior, probably would want to have her be a little bit more chunky than be a model-like figure, but that's a personal thing. All the other civilians look perfectly normal, which is just enough for this type of story. We don't need anything more than that for those regular parishioners and citizens. They do what they're supposed to do in the story, and they don't distract from the reading once again. The scene with Cardinal O'Grady is a little bit over the top to my liking, and his face looks off in a lot of the panels, but he always looks like a disgusting human being. So I guess that works fairly well. The chapel guards, or the guards that are there as well, their armor is pretty cool, and the cape and everything works fairly well for the characters. Something that works well for faceless minions. The violence over the scene in the first scene, I would say, the violence in the first scene is not too over the top when we're dealing with a monster hunting book. I mean, she's able to take out an entire group of monsters. That works well. Able to kill a vampire. That works well. And it's the same here with the scene with Mary fighting the werewolf. It's fairly straightforward, and it works really well. We get a nice explanation as well in the fight as to how she wants to tackle the creature. The action scenes work as they should, and really well. You have the scene where Jim is fighting the werewolves, which is a little bit weird. The scene itself works, and the werewolves look really great. But there's that scene here where he has an AR-15 in his hand, and the next panel, he's loading a shotgun. I'm not sure here if there wasn't more art or more things that were going around there. It just feels weird and doesn't feel like it should. Even though we see all the weapons he has before, the fact that we switch real quick here doesn't quite work, at least not in my opinion. As I said, the werewolves look really good, and they're in what us gamers usually call the war form, and it's better than the less beast-like werewolves that we sometimes see some people do, or the simply giant puppies that we see in other books as well. So it's a nice combination here, and we've seen werewolves recently on the channel in Mike Barron's Bronze Star. I think those look a little bit better than the ones we saw in Bronze Star, but here it's a bit of a different style, obviously. The backgrounds throughout this are really genuinely good. Here the cathedral looks really good, and the statues actually look perfectly fine as well. When Mary goes to the junkyard, it looks like a junkyard, and we get a lot of cars and a lot of things to break up the scenery. And in other places as well, we get good backgrounds. There's very, very few places where any shortcuts are used for the backgrounds, which is a big plus in my opinion. It does show a lot of attention to detail. Outside of the vehicles, we see at the cars, there's not really any mechanical designs in this one, but they're all perfectly functional. That RV looks really good, and people getting into it also look good. Sometimes when you have vehicles in some of those more indie comics, some of the people getting in or out of them look floaty. Here, they look like they're in the same panel, at least. Panel work is not the most imaginative I've seen, but it's really straightforward, easy to read, and easy to follow. And there's just small things that keep it interesting, like here where she pulls the sword. There's always a few little things here and there, which keeps you entertained and keeps you focused onto what is going on, which is perfectly fine. I don't need anything more than that in panel work, indeed. While this is not the most imaginative of concept and book by itself, the fact that everything that's in it actually does work well together makes it a very efficient little book overall. But honestly, there are a few things that I have issues with, mostly thematically. Secretive Order of the Templars, it's a thing that's been reused quite a bit over the years, most of the time in conspiracy theory kind of stories. We add them as monster hunters in a few other books, movies, and stories as well. Here I have Dominion with Dolph Lundgren as an example. It's not quite the same, but in the same vein. Here it's not tried or overdone, but it's a thing that's not rare, let's say. Many times where it is used, it forgets kind of the reasons why the Templar Order was kind of dismantled. One of the nice things, though, the monsters are not the smartest and the most powerful in the everything. They have their own failings, and it's a thing that is more interesting about them. We see monsters as almost perfect in a lot of recent books, especially when they're represented as semi-good guys or anti-heroes and things like that. Though here it's nice that they're villains, they get killed, and they do seem to have some weaknesses, both in their physical form and in how they act. This is another story where we see the church being represented as an evil and corrupt institution. I used to think that was a fun trope to use. I mean, I've seen it quite a few times. The thing is, at this point, it is getting really, really repetitive. I mean, I remember more video games than I've forgotten more video games where this is a trope being used than I actually have played recently. And we've got that, in so many books as well. And they always turn around the same thing. Corrupt institution led by actually sinful men. It's always the same thing. And it, like I said, not only does it get repetitive, I'm actually would be impressed if an author somewhere actually had the Christian church represented as self-righteous and overly ambitious just for once. It would be far more interesting as far as, even as a villainous organization, it would be more interesting than what we see in a lot of books and a lot of stories recently. I would have also expected poor Jim to put up more of a fight, but then again, he has no idea how to fight werewolves, so that probably didn't help him. And it does allow for the story to be moving forward. Gives us some nice world building with how he was killed and how he was dismembered, basically. So it does fit in what we do. Also nice to know that the locals have really no idea of what's going on, but they do try to bring up solutions, things that they believe could be a way of taking care of business. I don't know if there's any special ways of getting rid of Sasquatch. Maybe since they're Bigfoot, maybe put big shoes outside. Werewolves, a common villain, and it works pretty well, and people have the basic knowledge of how to get rid of them. Problem is, like the locals were saying, silver weapons, generally not the most reliable. Another thing I find a bit confusing, but that's more of a professional deformation, I guess. Having trained and done training for a long time, organization shouldn't have the desire to fail any of their trainees or any of their people. There's only two things that you should really be doing. Either you train them and you make sure that they don't fail, or if they do fail, you just get rid of them. Here it says in the book that if you fail the final trial, you have to go back to a process of selection and everything that lasts another 100 years. This gets quite long and involves quite a bit of resources, but it should be a lot more efficient to just have everybody succeed. This is going to be a little bit of a weird one for pacing. I think at the first time I'm actually putting image in the pacing section. This book is basically set up as I see most crowdfunders are nowadays. You get a big action scene with very fancy art at the very beginning, which you actually use to promote your book when you create a campaign. It follows the action, character development, world building, action format you normally see in American comics, so it doesn't break the immersion people have, and it's a great way to actually get people to be interested in your book, because that action scene, well, is what is interesting. If you were to start with a big scene of world building, I'm not sure you would attract as much attention. There's a few bits here that I probably would have switched around. After that, the part where Mary is at the church meeting with the locals should have been put after she meets with O'Grady. So we know really, she's given her mission, then she goes to bumfuck nowhere, USA. That would have made more sense in terms of setup here. The whole section with the drunk makes pretty little sense pacing-wise. It does give us an idea that Mary actually has a good heart and wants to help people. I would recommend people watch Mike Barron's recent video on Chekov's Rule, Chekov's Gun, for more details as to why this particular scene basically doesn't work in this book. If you wanted that scene to work, Mary helping that drunken man would have led to that drunken man helping Mary fighting the werewolf. That's how it would have gelled together in a cohesive story. Here, it's just an event in the story rather than something that helps the story, basically. The ending flashback, which is basically a page and a half about, is a bit odd because I wasn't expecting that at the end here, but it does set up very good follow-up in the subsequent books and the subsequent series. So it gives us an idea of, what's going to happen, how she came to be. And it's not a straight origin story or a straight, this is what happened. We're going to see some action here as to what led to Mary being Mary. So that works actually a lot better than some origin stories that I've read about recently. This is not a comic that would be my normal cup of tea. I'm not into mature books for mature people such as myself. I'm far more of an all ages book kind of people. I actually try to avoid manga with too mature themes as well, even though I read quite a bit of them. But every once in a while, it's nice to actually dip into this and actually enjoy something a little bit more adult, let's say. I can honestly enjoy books that are outside of my comfort zone as long as they're good. And this is a book that's perfectly fine, in my opinion. The characters are nice. The art is really great. The writing itself is really good. I mean, it doesn't reflect itself in what I'm saying here because I'm not actually showing you dialogue and everything. But the writing itself is really good. The dialogue is really nice. The internal monologues are really well. Would I recommend this? Well, you have to be part of the target audience for this. Luckily for Atrocity Press, well, the target audience are people with credit cards that can get the book, which makes it a lot easier. It's fairly cheap on Global Comics, even though I said the quality is not the best. If you don't mind reading it on the web app, actually, it's perfectly fine there. And if you have a Global Comics subscription, well, just take advantage of it. With all that, thank you very much for listening to me today. I hope you have a very nice rest of your day. Remember to click the like button, click the bell, notification, all that good stuff. Keep on reading comics, keep on enjoying them. I'll keep on reviewing and analyzing them, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.